Hello, I'm Maria Ressa. Welcome to Talk Thursday. On Tuesday, the government released a report on poverty showing poverty incidence for the first semester of 2012 is virtually unchanged from the same period in 2006 and 2009. President Aquino today said he doubted the statistics, saying that these may have been based on the wrong population data. With us now is National Statistical Coordination Board Secretary General Jose Ramon Albert. He is on Twitter at @Tuts_Albert. He will talk about the NSCB report and share some insights about what these numbers mean. Tuts, thank you for joining us on Rappler.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Maria.
So tell me, what do these numbers show us today?
Essentially, there are three things that you could glean out of the report. First is that poverty rate, the percentage of people or even the percentage of families who are poor, has not changed in the first semester of 2006 to the first semester of 2009, and if you compare also from the first semester of 2009 to the first semester of 2012. However, these are national figures.
Yes.
As you start drilling down, because you might always say, oh, so there are no changes, so the government hasn't really worked.
Right.
That's not quite the story. I think there's a little bit of the term is dagdag bawas to that story. When you start drilling down, particularly you will examine, for instance, as across the regions, again, there are we could not see major changes in poverty rates. But if you look at Caraga in particular, from 2009 to 2012, there was a decline. And as well, if you look at 2006 to 2009, there was a decline in Ilocos.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So it's not quite fair to immediately say there were really no changes. There were changes.
But the population has also grown during this time period,
yes,
is that correct?
that's correct.
So
that's correct.
the president actually challenges these numbers based on, he said, the wrong population data.
Yes.
How do you react
well,
to that?
it's like this. With due respect to the president, of course, because I'm a civil servant, and
Yes.
he is somewhat my super boss.
But you operate independently
Yes.
of
The statistical system is an independent system that, whenever official statisticians release numbers, we are there to really give a report to the country.
Correct.
About the socioeconomic conditions. So we say it as it is, right? Just like when a few months ago when my office also was the one that released the GDP figures.
Correct.
They said, some people were starting to question, we are not seeing this growth. Where is this growth? So we're the same office that released the GDP figures and the poverty figures for your information.
Right.
Now, these poverty figures are just telling us that nationally there seem to be no changes, but as you start drilling down, there are some changes.
Okay.
Right? That's the first thing.
Okay.
Second thing is if you start looking at income distribution, particularly the bottom 10%, bottom 20%, or bottom 30%, average incomes actually rose by about 11-12%.
Okay.
But the prices of food also rose by
Correct.
about 11-12% across from 2006 to first semester 2006
Right.
to first semester 2012. I always have to refer to first semester because traditionally my office, the NSCB, would be analyzing a survey, not of my office, but of another office under NEDA, called the National Statistics Office, our sister agency. They come up with a survey called the Family Income and Expenditure Survey.
Yes.
And this survey is, they sample about 50,000 households throughout the country.
Yes.
And of these 50,000 households, they visit these households twice, one on July to get the first semester data, and on January of the succeeding year to get the second semester data.
Okay.
All right. So I have to say that. Okay. So I guess there might be confusion that these numbers came from the NSO, but the original numbers, the FIES survey. But the census data, if you think they are not necessarily accurate, if there are questions on the numbers in the census data, these are independent activities.
They're not from your group.
The numbers that we generated are just percentages, they're poverty rates. We did not even give levels. We didn't say how many number of poor people we have in the country. We only came up with poverty rates, percentages. And we did not say in any way, I think because the president might have said that armed poverty levels went up. We did not say that.
Yes.
We only said the the percentage of the population that's poor continues to be practically very, very high, and it has not changed. We never said that the numbers were higher or lower. We just
Right.
said the percentages are not, the changes are not statistically significant.
So what does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean?
When we say they have not
like,
changed.
For
Yes.
example, again,
Yes.
I go back, like if our population has increased,
Yes.
keeping it constant, does that mean there is improvement, or do you expect that to have actually gone down? What is the right
When we
direction?
say that we have, because these are all coming from a survey, all right?
Okay.
And surveys always have margins of error.
errors, right?
So you have to
And
realize.
the field work, the field, not,
There are
not-
also-
but the field
yes.
work is done by another group.
Yes,
right?
but the actual field work was done by the NSO, the National
NSO,
Statistics Office,
correct.
which is a sister agency, another attached agency to our National Economic Development Authority.
Okay.
All right. So we did have we analyzed the survey of the NSO
Right.
using the poverty lines that was set by the NSCB Technical Working Group on Poverty Statistics.
Okay.
This is an expert group. Okay, they came up with a methodology, and we were the ones that acted as the the number crunchers based on what the experts. Of course, I was part of that team
Right,
of experts. But anyways, we did have a lot of discussions over the past few months on what would be an appropriate methodology for coming up with poverty lines, which we then applied to the FIES.
Right.
Yes.
And again, different administrations have actually changed variables in a lot of these things. So, given your expert opinion, what do these numbers tell us?
They only say that, in a way, there are challenges. There are very big challenges for government, and not just government. I think we tend to always think that it's always just government's responsibility to address the poverty situation. We have to start to realize it's not just government's concern. It should be everyone's concern.
Right.
It's the private sector has to do its share. We individually have to do our share. And I think that's something that we tend to forget.
But the expectation of most people is that since the government had a 6.6% growth rate, that it should trickle down and we should see it. Is that realistic?
Again, we were the ones who produced the GDP figures.
Correct.
And all of this. I will just refer to what NEDA said, our Director General at NEDA. He says that if you're really going to have economic growth that's sustained, then you would expect after a few years, maybe things would start to improve. All right? So they're really working on making the growth very inclusive. That's part of the development plan, the so-called Philippine Development Plan.
Interesting. I'll just throw a comment from Poway, the Wonder Dog. This is at Poway Sharpe, a Twitter account who's very active, particularly on political issues. FYI, at President Noy was mad when he read this bannered on a leading broadsheet. He further stated the NSCB data is wrong. The amusing part is at President Noy's fumbling attempt to explain why he doubted the NSCB. Is there any reason to doubt the NSCB?
Well, the NSCB is another agency under NEDA. Okay, NSO is another agency under NEDA. We did this in collaboration with NSO and our technical working group on poverty statistics, an expert group. All right. So, but I guess he may have. Again, with all due respect to my super boss,
Right.
The figures that we generated were all from a sample survey. This survey that we said, it had nothing to do with the census figures, which he seems to be attributing it to. Okay. Even I think there was a statement that he pointed out in one of Rappler's articles that he said that the per capita figures, the way we calculate per capita is actually directly from the household itself. When you come up with the total household income, you find out what is the number of persons in the household sampled.
Yes.
You divide that, that's the per capita income.
Right, right.
So total population figures in an area have no bearing. So we did not actually calculate numbers of population directly.
Correct.
So
Okay.
it had no effect.
So so it seems that the president misunderstood part of it, and then
Well, it's because you could probably understand it's very technical, you know.
Yes.
I mean, so you would understand that if the president, in fact, that's the reason why now I make more efforts to come out in media, because I need to be able to explain, because sometimes data is, we have so much data around, and we can be very data rich, but sometimes we can be information poor, right?
Understanding what the
that's-
data means, yes.
So unfortunately, sometimes the traditional responsibility of an official statistician is just to release the numbers. But now I feel that there might be a responsibility on my part to also explain in a sense that whenever numbers may be misinterpreted.
The
Yes.
president also said that he received the numbers just about 24 hours ahead. Is he asking, well, let me not ask you what he thinks, but there's the assumption there, the implicit assumption is that he seemed to have wanted to go through them beforehand. Is that something that's done in the past, or?
Well, there has always been a standard protocol, not just for poverty statistics, but even for national accounts, the GDP figures, because we are under the NEDA.
Yes.
So we report directly to our department to which we are attached to. So, of course, I'm very new to my agency. I was just appointed by the president, by the way, last September. And the thing is, the protocol is we at the NSCB will give to NEDA a day before, whether it's the GDP figures or the poverty figures, and they may, there is a statement that we release that this cannot be released to the public until we come up with a press release,
Right.
or sorry, the press conference.
Right.
And so it would be NEDA's responsibility to tell the president that that these are the numbers, right?
Interesting here, though, is so the numbers are correct. They show that incidents of poverty haven't changed.
Yes.
What does that mean exactly? Again, I'm asking mostly because our population has grown.
Yes.
If the numbers haven't changed, does that mean that it's like we're running on a treadmill? The inflation rate is cutting any kind of progress. What does it mean in normal language? What does this tell us about the Philippines?
Again, I would just say that there are enormous challenges, that if things are not changing dramatically as far as living standards, but again, it may be a misnomer to say that if you say on the aggregate things have not changed, it doesn't mean there are really no changes. There may be
Correct.
changes, some may be going up, some may be going down,
We're
So-
talking on a macro scale.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a very big difference when you say absolutely no changes. That's not what we're saying. We're just saying that on the aggregate, we don't seem to have anything to report of any evidence that there have been changes. There may have been.
Yes.
There may have been,
And you mentioned some instances where they've increased or decreased.
Well,
right?
in Caraga, for instance,
Yeah.
in the Caraga region, we reported that there was an actual decrease
Decrease.
in poverty from 2009 to 2012.
Right.
What the president may have referred to as ARM, there was a slight increase, but it's not statistically significant. The difference, in other words, we are not that sure that there was a real increase.
Right.
There may have been, but it may have gone down. So the president may be right that if he thinks that it may have gone down, it may be true. It may be
Yes.
true, but the only things we don't know.
Yes. Well, again,
Yes.
when you're pulling it up to macro, the ups and downs of individual places will even out.
Right.
But again, the big picture is that there hasn't been a change.
Yes, and
Are
part of that reason is really the third point that I wanted to say, that income inequality persists. Okay, that's also what we reported. If you look at the bottom,
income inequality means
Yes.
there's a gap between the rich,
the rich and the poor.
Okay,
Yes,
that
correct.
exists.
But traditionally we always use that line of those words. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poor. That's not what we're saying.
Yes.
We're just saying that there is a divide
gap.
between the rich and the poor. That's income inequality. Income inequality arises because we're not all getting the same incomes. If everybody had the same incomes, then there is income equality. But there is inequality.
Is there a country in the world that has that? There isn't
There's
any.
no such country with
Yes.
income equality.
Yes, yes.
Maybe heaven.
Correct.
All right.
hope.
But so the only thing is, we try our best to make income as unequal as possible.
Yes.
But
To narrow the gap.
To narrow the gap between the rich and the poor. So right now, the evidence suggests that if you look at the bottom 10% and you add the bottom 20%, put their incomes together, the share of their income to the total national income is about 6%. If you look at the upper 20%, in other words, the upper 10% and the next 10%, put them together, their share to national income is 50%. So, and the three surveys I mentioned, '06 first semester, '09 first semester, and '12 first semester, all say the same picture.